Welcome. This is what Review Manager looks like when it's open. We're going to focus on the upper left, clicking on New. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how, without logging into the Cochrane system, how to create a new file so that you can enter data to get a forest plot. So that's our aim here. So that means we're going to be ignoring a lot of extra things about this program. So just focus on clicking on New, and what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new review, and we're going to create this. We're going to start off with an example of the flexible review, and I'm just going to do that to show you how it would look if you're doing a review with associations. After this, I'm going to go back through the process with an intervention review, and we have some information from one of the systematic reviews that you were given as an option that you can go through just to practice. The flexible review is there for not just interventions, but for other approaches. And if you look at it with the subtype, so select subtype, keep that option, and then click Next. So prognosis will just give you a flexible review looking at associations. Now here I'm going to give it the title of Pregnancy Outcomes and Determinants. Because I'm using Fisher as the basis for this example, we'll go there. Next. Okay, here it will automatically select protocol. We actually want a full review because we need the forest plot. So we're not going to fill in all the information, but the full review is needed for the data analysis that we're trying to get. And then I'm going to click Finish already. So that's going to create a new file with your new name and allow you to enter the study authors and their data. I'm going to click on Finish. And here, this looks like a lot. It's the whole process of the review, going from abstract, background, objectives, methods, results, everything. We don't need everything, but we do need to enter information in order to get our forest plot. So if you look down on the left, what we ultimately want are these figures, and we can't get that information, so we can't just add a figure without having entered information about the studies. So we're going to end up here, but we're going to start with the studies and references. So when you click on studies and references, it's going to give you on the right side, references to studies, included studies. You can add a study. And I'm just going to add the 3 studies that have information on young maternal age and depression. So I'm going to add that information from the systematic review. This is selected information from Fisher et al. Now I don't have all of the details. They didn't give the information that we need to complete the process. So we would have to actually go to the primary data to get a forest plot from this information. But I'm just going to show you how to do it so you know what to do with the data you have, and hopefully you have some primary data yourself now. So I'm going to say we're going to start with Lim Lom Wongse. Not sure on the pronunciation of that. But one of the 3 articles with information on young age and perinatal mental disorders is Lim Lom Wongse et al. 2006. And then we're going to click on Next. And it says Published Data Only. That's fine. It's published data. The year is 2006. And we're going to skip the identifiers. We don't need to add an identifier unless we want to do something additional with it. And we're going to finish that process. Okay. Now we're going to do this process again. We're going to add another study. And this time we're going to add Abiodun et al. 2006, so that's the second author with this information. Published data only again, 2006. Next, and we're going to do nothing. We're going to finish it. So now we have 2 included studies here in our reference list. We're going to add a third one. And this is the third survey that we have information for. Clicking on next, published data only again, 2007, next, and finish. Okay, so now we have 3 included studies. Okay, checking up references to study, included studies, and we have 3. And this is empty because we didn't add information, we didn't add the reference details, we didn't provide the text. Those are options that you have, but for creating the forest plot, we don't need everything. The next step we want to do is to add information for our comparison. So now we have our authors added. We're going to data analysis. So data and analysis, we're going to add our comparison here. Click on Add Comparison. And here we want associations with young maternal age. Okay, I'm going to click on Next. And we don't actually want to do nothing after this. We want to add an outcome. So we're adding our comparison, that's young versus old, and we want to compare that in terms of mental health related outcomes. So I'm going to click on Add an Outcome under New Comparison, and I'm going to click on Continue. Now the next screen that shows up is dichotomous, and for an odds ratio we need to have a dichotomous data type. But in order to get the forest plots, we would actually need to have the number of participants with the events, so the yes and the no, and the totals of the participants in, and they say experimental and control. Think of this in terms of the comparison versus control, or the young versus old women. So I'm going to click on Finish here, and that will open up the opportunity to enter your raw data. So I'm just going to show you how that looks. So if you want to do this type of forest plot, you can enter it this way. So click on Finish, and here what you see on your right side is the graph for the forest plot ready to go, but there's nothing in it yet because we don't have any information. On the left side of the screen, or actually just to the left of that odds ratio graphic, we see here what could be a 2x2 table, but there's no information, 0 information. So how do we get information in here? Here's where you need to go up to this Add Study Data. So it's just to the left of the OR icon is a plus green icon. So here's where we have to add our study data. Now if you hadn't entered these studies already, this would be blank. There would be no options. But we have entered that information. So if you highlight each one, click on Control to highlight multiple different studies, in this case just 3. And then these are highlighted. You can also filter by range or by outcome, other information you might have entered. We didn't do that because we only have 3 studies. So I'm going to click on Finish here. So I've clicked on the studies that I want to include. I'm including all 3. I'm clicking on Finish. And now I have the opportunity on the same left screen that was empty before. I have a check mark by each of these studies. And here I could enter data if I had it, 50 out of 100. And let's say this was 25 out of 100. Now I'm making this up, this isn't real. So let's say I had that information, I could press enter, and that one would provide a data point. Now in reality, we don't have these numbers from the existing survey. If you did, you could add that information. So if you go back to Abiodun, and if Abiodun has that information with a report, how many people have that outcome. So let's say it's perinatal depression in young women. If there are 50 young women who have perinatal depression out of a total of 100, these numbers would be accurate. But in fact, these are not real numbers. And the totals are not always given in a study. So you may not be able to do this forest plot because of that. So in explaining whether or not you did a forest plot or why you did or didn't do a forest plot, you need to get into the data that you have and explain what you have, what you don't have, and justify that in your results. So in your methods, you might write that you plan to calculate a forest plot and to do a meta-analysis, but that may not be possible if you don't have that information. So here it says the odds ratios for the second two study are not estimable because I didn't enter data, because I don't have data for it. So this is the approach that you will use for associations. It's going to look very similar when we get into the intervention data. All of the same options appear, but I wanted you to see what it's going to look like if you enter it from the flexible review type and select prognosis and then select dichotomous outcomes for odds ratios. Now you could also have selected mean differences, and you can still add that in if you have information on mean differences. But you might actually get to this point before you realize that you don't have all the data that you need. And then the question is whether by going back to these original studies you can collect that information, or whether it's simply not possible. Now, if you're doing a systematic review for publication, it would be traditional to contact the authors and try to get the information, even if it's not reported in their published studies. So the first step is to go back to the review that you started with, a systematic review, look at the information that they gave. You would always need to collect the original data, in other words, access the original sources, go to those original reviews and find that information, and then get the outcomes that are comparable to multiple studies.